Morning, everybody. Welcome to the SEMC July virtual program, Post-Pandemic Fundraising, 8 Things Every New Museum Professional Should Know. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I am the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a light-skinned white female with shoulder-length reddish-brown hair, which is sort of, excuse me, straight today, despite the humidity down here in Charleston, South Carolina. I'm wearing black-rimmed glasses that are often referred to as cat eye style, and today I'm wearing a plum-colored sleeveless blouse, and I'm in my home office with a virtual backdrop of the SEMC logo on a desktop computer. A warm welcome to all of our members joining us today, as well as those who may be new to SEMC. SEMC is a regional professional organization representing museums and museum staff in the 12 southeastern states, as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of around 1,500 and we continue to grow. I'm pleased to continue our 2021 virtual program series with this talk focused on fundraising after a year of pandemic difficulties, a topic that can apply to all museum professionals no matter what your role. Finally, a huge thanks to the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation for the significant support they have provided to SEMC over this past year to make these programs possible and allow us to keep them free for all to attend. Also, thank you to Erin Banks of Banks Creative in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. She is the talent behind our promotional graphics for SEMC. As always, just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce our speakers. The session is being recorded and will be available on the SEMC YouTube channel by the end of the week. Closed captioning is available for today's program. You can turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen and make sure to enable the auto transcription feature. A written transcript of today's session will also be available as soon as we can get it edited. I'm certain there will be many questions for our speaker, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so we can keep track and address them all at the end of the program. While this is a Zoom webinar and your cameras are off, you're still here, and I encourage you all to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which will not be captured in the recording. Now, it is my pleasure to once again introduce our speaker, Linda Wise McNay, who is the founder, owner, and principal consultant with Our Fundraising Search in Atlanta. She's completed more than 15 years of consulting and has served more than 175 clients. Linda's nonprofit background includes work with both higher and secondary education, the arts, human services, and faith-based organizations. She's also included working on capital campaigns, annual funds, planned giving, membership, and development and executive searches. Linda has been working with SEMC for several years as a fundraising consultant, helping us plan strategies for long-term sustainability of many of our programs, including the annual meeting and the Leadership Institute. You can learn more about Linda from her full bio, which I will post in the chat shortly. I'm so thankful, Linda, for your time and all that you have devoted to this topic and both sessions, and for all the support you and our fundraising search have given SEMC over the years. Now I'm pleased to turn the floor over to you for the program.
Thank you so much. And now I'm going to share my screen here with you. All right, thank you so much for inviting me to be with you today. This is actually part 2. The last time we did talk about what new professionals in the museum field might want to know. And today, this session is pretty much for everybody. And we're talking about PPF. It's a term we coined, and that's for post-pandemic fundraising. So we have some information to share with you today. But first, since you heard a little bit about me, I'd like to learn a little bit about you. And we have 2 questions in a poll that Xenia, if you'll please put up that first one. I like to know who the audience is because it changes. It might change what I have to share with you today based on who's in the room. So we would like to know how long you have been in arts museum field, 5 years or more, 1 to 5 years, or less than 1 year. That helps me know how much information to share or if I can skip some parts. And I can tell you what we've been doing during COVID. Things have been different for us, as I'm sure it has been for you. So we don't have as many campaigns going on. We've still been coaching for fundraising, and we've added strategic planning and grant writing to our services. So here's the answer to our poll. We have some experienced folks in the room. 86% have been in this field for 5 years or more, 14% 1 to 5 years, and nobody less than 1 year. So that's who was here last time. Very good. So we have one more question, if we could do it next before we go farther. I will also tell you that we have added to our staff. We have more people helping us so that we have more people to help you if you need help with fundraising going forward. Just get in touch with me separately. So today's question, the next question is, what is your primary role for the museum? I'm interested to know if we have the CEO or the executive director, if you are actually in development, if you're a museum staff member, just not necessarily in development, if you are a board member or a volunteer, or if there's some category that I haven't thought of. That would be helpful to know too. So if you would please answer that question, then I'll share with you. We have an agenda here in a minute that I will start with as soon as we have the answers to this poll. Right, well, here we go. Oh, 67% CEOs. A third of you are in development, and then a third of you are museum staff members, not necessarily one of those other two. Okay. Well, that's helpful. Well, thank you for sharing, and I don't know if there's anything else I can tell you about me. Then you covered that really well. Let's get started. Oh, let's see. Not advancing, I'll advance this way. All right, here's our agenda, at least what I've prepared for you. And after I've covered that, if there's anything else that you'd like to cover, I'm happy to answer questions toward the end, or if you put something in the chat, then you will let me know. So I always start my presentations with information about giving, and I'm prepared to share with you new information that just came out in June about giving in the United States last year. And then you may have had an opportunity to participate in a survey. We sent a really quick SEM survey last week about giving just to SEMC arts institutions, and I have those results, or at least the results we have so far. Then we're going to talk about how your museum stacks up. How do you compare with your peers if you did not have an opportunity to complete the survey yourself? We're going to say maybe what happens next. I mean, hopefully we're at the end of COVID and things are getting better, things are opening up. Personally, I've been out visiting people and I've been to coffee and lunch, and I hope you've had an opportunity to get out as well. I am going to cover a few basics of fundraising because those are evergreen. It doesn't matter if it's COVID or not COVID. These are things we all need to be doing every year. And then we have 8 specific recommendations for you to take with you today, and any others we can come up with together. So is there anything else that you'd like to know? Otherwise, we'll move to the next. Right. So Giving USA is tax information that's prepared and shared across the United States about how much people give and to which categories. And good news, based on 2020, and this might surprise you, it surprised a lot of us. 2019 was a banner year, a record of giving. It was about $450 billion, and sometimes that number surprises people too. But in 2019, it's $472 billion was given away in 2020. So that was 5% more than the year before. So does that surprise you? Now this chart shows where the money came from. Corporate giving was only 16 million, and that giving was down. It was down 7.8%. I'm not surprised at that because companies weren't doing as well during COVID. Foundation giving was up. It was up about 17%, and that was $88 billion. But those gifts might have been going to people who were affected more by COVID, to healthcare, to food security, homelessness, that kind of thing. It might not necessarily been coming to your museum, but still 80% of the money that's given away every year comes from individuals. And that is true year after year. Now here is the same chart, but instead of where the money comes from, where does the money go? And in the past, I've been doing fundraising for about 30 years. Giving to religion, which is that blue piece of this pie chart, used to be half of the chart, 55%. But now it's only about a third of the chart. So giving to religion has been declining, and it has been declining for the last 35 years. So they need to think about how to raise money going forward. And if they were to start raising money like you or like colleges and universities, they might be able to raise more money. But the traditional method of giving to religion has been declining. Education is the next largest piece of the pie. That's about $71 billion. It's still a lot of money. If you have educational programs at your institution, it still is recorded under arts. And this is based on how your tax returns are prepared. But I believe all of us who are members of SEMC are in the arts and culture category, which is that yellow piece of the pie. It is a tiny piece of the pie, and giving to arts and culture declined by 7.5%. That may or may not surprise you. If your giving was higher than that, you should feel good about it. If your giving was the same as the year before, then you could pat yourself on the back. But if your giving declined, you're in the same boat as a whole lot of other institutions. Now, this chart is important for us to know going forward, because we know once COVID is over and we start moving ahead, we still have what I think of as maybe organizations that compete for the philanthropic dollar. So these are some new categories, those small pieces of the pie, and there's more every year. Giving to animals, giving to environment, giving to other things like international affairs. We all are competing for the philanthropic dollar, and not everyone is interested in arts and culture, and we have to do a better job of selling our product and what we do. Now, we conducted a survey with just 8 questions on it, and we sent it to several different groups. And for today, I was going to share with you the results of our clients and SEMC. We sent it to all the members of SEMC, but we haven't given a very long response time. So I'll share with you what we have as of today, and I will share additional results with Xenia if we continue to get respondents. You know, other people might be doing some other things and might not have had a chance to respond yet. But in our clients, we have about a third of the respondents were in arts and culture. So I'll share with you how we split that information, but it is a smaller subset of giving based on, you can compare it with 2020 and arts and culture in SEMC in the South. So we've given you 2 charts to show the impact of all nonprofits, and look at that, and this information will be shared with you. I'm not going to dwell on it. I really want to share with you about arts and culture, and overall fundraising increased by many of the organizations, and that may or may not have happened in your institution. And that was really great. But then there was also 40% of those responding that their fundraising decreased by more than 5%. And that probably had to do with which museums were able to open and do that sooner and to continue with their programming virtually, even if they weren't open. So we don't have all the answers to the whys. You know what's been happening in your institution, but this is what your peer institutions have reported locally on this question. So one of the things we wanted to ask is, how did the mix of fundraising change? I showed you the very first chart of Giving USA. So there's corporate funding, there's foundation funding, and there's individual giving. We don't usually report on government funding. We don't do a lot of government requests, but because there were PPP funds available this year, many of our institutions applied and received money. So that's great, and that helped the bottom line. It probably helped some organizations balance their budget, but it does need to be a consideration in your own budget. If that's not to be repeated next year, you're going to have to go back and get some of your prior donors to balance your budget or increase going forward in some of these other giving categories. So we thought this would be helpful to see what really happened. And again, arts and museums is the chart at the bottom. Giving from individuals increased in a third of the institutions by more than 5%. And then nobody showed a decrease of 0 to 5% in individual giving, but 10% of those reporting showed a decrease of more than 5%. So individuals actually continued to give like we would want them to do. If they're committed to you, we need them to be committed to you all the time. Foundation funding was up, but not by a lot. 30%, which was the largest response, was up. And it's possible that some of your foundation funding was already in the mix. There's usually a longer lead time for that. Maybe you'd already requested gifts, or maybe some foundations came in and started giving to annual support when they don't normally, and you might have benefited from that. Corporate funding was flat for last year, but we're really expecting that to decline going forward, and we'll talk about that again in a few minutes. So I don't know what you saw in your corporate giving. Many arts institutions had to cancel their live events, whether that was a gala or an auction or something else, and so there might have been some virtual or activities, and that might have affected your corporate support, at least as far as sponsorship goes. And then 40% of arts and museums that reported in this survey increased their government funding by more than 5%, 40%. So we believe that's the PPP money. We didn't ask for specifics because this was a very simple, quick survey, but that was the biggest increase. I think once you've had the time to look at these, you can do your own analysis and compare that with how your institution measured up. Now, some museums were in capital campaigns when COVID started. And we asked, well, what happened? Did you stop? Did you continue? Or did you just postpone it? And museums said they kept going. Isn't that amazing? And more of them kept going than with other types of nonprofits. So frankly, I was surprised, but it depended on where the organization was in the campaign, how much money they'd raised, what their goals were, and how committed their donors were. So it really made a difference. So the second highest was 25% said they completed the current phase and then they suspended and will go back and continue later. So I was hoping that by Labor Day, things would be back to normal, and I'm expecting lots of campaigns to come back. We'll see if that's true for arts and cultural institutions. Now, we asked staffing questions because early on during COVID, I kept hearing about people being laid off or cut back in hours or time, or people left, they weren't replaced. And that can have a terrible effect on fundraising. It is so hard, you all know this, especially those of you who are CEOs, to find and keep good development officers, which definitely impacts your fundraising. The longer an individual has been in an organization, the better job they're going to do. So here's what museums reported at the bottom. And fundraising leadership, to define that, we said that was chief development officers and development directors. And those reporting for SEMC and in our client base, staffing stayed stable. 20% had a decrease in that category. And 10% said they increased. That's a little bit of a surprise. Now, fundraisers in general, that second category were major gift officers, annual fund managers, and other types of solicitors. That was sort of a catch-all. And in that category, 30% remained stable, 10% increased, and 30% decreased. So that's a little bit scary. They might have kept their chief development officer, but they didn't keep everyone. Fundraising support, we define that as being people who do prospect research, donor research of other types, gift entry, the administrative support. 40% said they remained stable, 10% increased, and 20% decreased. And nobody in those first three categories I mentioned eliminated positions for those three categories. Now, events was a little bit different story. For event staff, if organizations had someone specifically to do events, 20% remained stable. Nobody increased staff during this period. That's not a surprise. 20% decreased, and then 10% did eliminate some positions for just events. Now, it remains to be seen if those will come back once we start having in-person events, at least the way we were doing them before. So depending on what an organization said to the other question about if you're in campaign, what's going to happen going forward? This question was, are you going to have any campaigns in the future? Because that's usually a sign of good health. If you're going to have a campaign, normally your annual fund's in good shape, you've got some major gift programs, maybe some great events happening, an annual gala, and then you're probably ready for a capital campaign. So we ask museums, like, okay, are you going to go back and have campaigns? And 56% said they are planning one, and it's something that's new, that hadn't been on the books before. So maybe they spent some time during COVID thinking about their master plan and what the needs were and how they want to come out of the gate strong. A third said they were going to go back and finish the campaign they'd already started. So we just don't know exactly what day they'll say go, but hopefully things will be better soon. Now, we ask an open-ended question if people had challenges and successes that they wanted to share. And just to show, some people had some great answers to this. Some people reported getting more donations than memberships, and they were delighted by that. They were able to keep the community safe and still provide services to their primary audiences. That's a great win. The challenge was to keep the board engaged because, we're on Zoom now. It's hard to do Zoom all day long, and it's hard to keep people as interested if they can't come in person. But some organizations said they got some great government funds and some project grants, some challenge grants. Oh, that's excellent. Some organizations did say, well, yeah, we did have staff reductions, but we still increased giving from individuals, and we got some sponsorships. And even though our big events were canceled, sometimes the sponsors let the organizations keep the money, even though they didn't have the event. So I don't know what that means for this year. They're going to want something special, maybe. I've heard that weddings are back on track this year, but there's going to be twice as many weddings. So I don't know if there's going to be twice as many events going forward, but we'll see. So just to sum this up, I know this is a lot of material to share with you and we have other things to cover, but we thought you might benefit from seeing what your peers have learned. Museums saw more drastic swings, positive and negative, than the rest of the nonprofit sector. Museums were able to keep up their individual giving. They saw more declines in corporate support. If they were in a campaign, they kept going, which was not true of all nonprofits. There was some volatility in staffing, but not too many layoffs. And now everybody's getting ready to move forward with campaigns. So any questions in the chat before I continue with our program? All right. Now, I want to just review some basics. Most of you know this, but I don't think we can hear this too many times. This is what we have to get back in front of our mind as we come out of COVID. Post-pandemic fundraising requires you to be very clear about your vision and your mission. So if you're going to be in a campaign, you got to tell people why that's important and why you should be have them support you as opposed to the organizations down the street. So clarifying your case for support is anything different going forward. You've got to engage your leadership. And the leadership, if you haven't been having board members meeting, then you probably want to bring them back, go see them individually, wear your mask, get vaccinated, whatever it takes to be able to see people face to face again. We want everybody to understand the principles of effective fundraising. So if you have some new board members or if they're rusty, it might be time to bring in somebody who can help teach your board how to ask and remind them, because they all need to participate in fundraising. They're responsible for the budget. It is not just the executive director or just the development staff. It is a board member responsibility, and they need to be involved in the fundraising plan. So the development officer might get the plan ready and share that with the boss, but the development committee and the board, they need to embrace it, vote on it, to accept it, and then help make it successful. Now, I believe the fundraising for museums is unique. So when you're open, if you're not, I hope you get open soon to the public, regular hours, invite people for things that are special. You get to see people every day. I went back and visited my old haunt at the High Museum last week. There weren't very many people there. I was so happy to be back. And museums are one of the safest places you can be now, because they're usually big and open and not too many crowds, and you can limit how many people come in at a time. You got to make sure your annual support is strong, and that can be membership or annual fund or both. But that's going to be important to get back to sending letters and calling people and sending those solicitations. Make sure you have monthly giving. I read this morning that if you haven't been offering monthly giving, you should now. That is a great post-COVID technique, and it can be for any of these categories. Now, we know you're going to have competing interests once your volunteers are back. There's members, there's friends, there's docents, there's curators. Everybody has their own pet project. We want to support them all, but it will be important to list them, hear what they want, prioritize them, and make sure that the museum moves ahead sequentially and funding the ones that are the most important to the organization once the annual fund has been met to keep the doors open. I have noticed that salaries are not always competitive in museums, so you need to make sure that that is a priority going forward, especially for your development officers. The reason there's so much turnover, and I think that's the next category, is even if you're able to find somebody, it's hard to keep good development officers. I'm seeing signing bonuses now and improved benefits. Organizations are letting their employees continue to work from home. That's difficult in a museum, but maybe there is some sort of a sharing where some work can be done remotely, especially for the grant writing piece. and some can be done on site. We're going to have to be a little bit flexible if you want to keep good people, because if you can't offer it, they're going to walk down the street and go to work at another nonprofit who's able to offer them those things. So usually the development officer could be the next highest paid after the executive director. And I don't want to leave the executive directors out. They need to be remunerated for all the things they've been doing during COVID to make up for loss of staff in other areas. And we need to make sure we appreciate and care for each other as we move forward. Now, annual fund is exactly what it sounds like. It means it comes every year. And you need to know, I met with a new client yesterday, and we spent a whole hour together, and they were not able to tell me how much money they need to raise this year and where they are year to date. And they started in January. So that will be our first item on our agenda the next time we meet. You need to know this. How are you doing, and how are you going to get to your goal by December 31 if that's your fiscal year as well? The best way to raise money now, in addition to the annual fund, is with a major gift program. I'm guessing all of you could come up with 10 prospects who could give whatever a major gift is for your institution. It could be $100, could be $1,000, could be $10,000. Whatever it is, come up with some prospects. The executive director should hit the road and go out and either visit people or invite people in one-on-one and to explain that case for support that we talked about. That's so important to say, okay, we're back, the doors are open, here's what we need. And hopefully, if you need a capital campaign, you can get back to planning that. There's some good information on the Association of Fundraising Professional website in the past few days. Our fundraising search has some information available that was posted there on how to get ready for a capital campaign and how you can do that by Labor Day. So if you would like that information, it's on our website, and we can also send you an email. Just let us know. I'm hoping some of you have been working with your planned giving prospects. These are people who've cared about you for a long time, because if you don't have an endowment, it sure would be helpful to start one so that you will have one the next time there's a pandemic, and you know it'll come around again. Are your events back? Are people ready to come out? They'll probably have to tell you, and you'll be able to tell that by how many sign up. Maybe you start with small group events. That's always nice anyway, in addition to the big major events, but hopefully we'll all be able to get back to having these activities soon. Most institutions need all of these. We call that comprehensive fundraising, and it's not, we shouldn't spend all our time on any one of these categories. You need to have a plan that includes all these activities if you want to advance your museum post-COVID. I hope you'll remember that fundraising is all about the relationships. It's really not about the money. I hope you've been doing good stewardship all along. My husband and I support a number of different organizations, and as I watched what happened, all of them continued to solicit us during COVID, and there were 2 that reached out and called us and asked how we were doing. And they weren't asking for money. They were calling to say, hey, Linda, how are you doing? We've missed you. How are things for you during COVID? I really appreciated that, and I know which 2 institutions now have gone to the top of my list on what I'm going to support going forward. So it is not too late if you haven't been doing a good job of getting people together. It's time. This is the development cycle, and it is continuous. It's not a vicious cycle. It is just a continuous cycle, and you can start at any point in this circle. You can do research to find yourself some new donors. If you don't have a good donor search program, we can get a discount for our clients on donor search. You can identify donors that are similar to the ones you already have. Do a little more research to see who in your development committee or who on your team knows them. Then you want to cultivate them, invite them in, find out what type of art they like, and then do a little more research, and then it's time to ask. Make sure you ask. If you haven't been asking, it is time. It's okay to ask. Then we want to thank people really well, steward them, continue to put their name on the donor wall, put them in the annual report, make sure other people know. That's a great thing for board members to do, is help you with saying thank you. They can write letters, they can make phone calls, and then start again, because we want to always be working this whole entire circle regularly with individuals and our other organizations that support us. Now, things have not been normal. The mail doesn't get delivered on time. We're not able to gather, but we need to go back and revisit what we call the solicitation staircase. These are all the different methods of giving. I always put them in order. The ones at the bottom are the least effective ways to raise money. So you should be spending your time at the top of the stairs, especially if you're the ED. Events, we all need events. They're not the best way to raise money necessarily. We need to have events and bring people in, but if you don't have a successful event, or if the expenses are too high, you might have a golf tournament. If it rains, then you don't raise any money. They're just a little riskier than other types of activities. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have events. You just got to have not too many of them. You can put information in your newsletters and online, but if you don't actually ask, it's not effective. We want to try doing emails. You can text to give. You can see if it works with part of your population. It is really easy to delete those and not get a response. A typed letter that's personal, a letter to me that says, "Dear member," doesn't get a response as if it says, "Dear Linda." And I really like those letters that say, "Linda, thank you for your gift last year of $100. Would you consider a gift of $200 this year? And here's why." So the more personal you can make it, the better. If you combine a written letter with a phone call, the odds of me giving are increased. So you could call me and either say, "Linda, we're going to send you a letter in the mail next week. I hope you'll respond." Or you can say, "Linda, you should have gotten us a letter from us in the mail. Would you be able to make that gift of $200? That's really helpful if you can time it like that. You can have people meet in small groups. I don't solicit in small groups because if one person in the group says, "Oh no, I'm not doing that," then you lose the whole room. So you can bring people together and have a lunch or a meeting, but what you really want to do is follow up with them individually, either by you or a volunteer. And finally, the best way to raise money is in person, one-on-one, and say, "Would you consider giving to this project?" And then wait for their response. And they can only say yes, no, or maybe. You get a 50-50 response. And sometimes you find out more about what they need in order to get to yes. If you need help on how to make that solicitation, that can be another session, and just tell Xenia we'll do that one next time, and we'll remind you how to ask. Now here's what your board should be doing. They should all be making a gift to the annual fund, and they should make sure that they're including your museum as one of their top 3 giving priorities. That should be required of all board members. They should consider a planned gift. That means you have to ask them for it. And if you have a campaign, they need to make a gift. 100% of your board should participate, and they need to help you with fundraising activities. And we can tell you what some of those activities might be. They can help you find prospects. This is more important right now than ever before because you might have lost some donors. We got to get some new ones. They can help you cultivate. They can help you solicit. They can host an event. They can invite people and bring them to your events. They should come themselves. They can offer acknowledgments. I mentioned that already. They should be your advocate. They should be thinking about you all the time and sending people to you and introducing the ED to their friends, and then make sure the money's spent how we promised. I don't know how many of you have a development committee. That'll be a great poll question for next time. The client I started with yesterday said they haven't been meeting. It's time to meet, at least virtually, if not in person, because it's their job to help you with that fundraising plan, and it's their job to conduct these fundraising activities. They are supposed to solicit each other. You can add extra people to your development committee who are not on the board, but probably a board member would chair the development committee, and they should be helping you with all of these activities to make sure you have enough money for the museum. People give because you ask them, not because they think of it on their own. And it's always a sort of a juggling act. I think of it as a game and getting all the pieces going in the right time. We get the right person to ask the right prospect for the right amount of money for the right project at just the right time. And when it works, it really works great. So here's a donor, usually starts as an annual donor at some level, and it might be a member in your case. Then they might make a major gift. They probably are not going to do that every year. And finally, a few of those people might make a planned gift. So everyone is a prospect. At least everyone who visits your museum is an annual fund prospect. Now, what we want you to do now that we've talked about the basics of fundraising, we're all thinking fundraising again, if we haven't been lately. How did your museum compare with our research? I hope you've been thinking about that already. If you didn't have a chance to complete the survey, it's still available. You can look at the specific questions, but you need to answer those questions for your institution. How are you doing in those categories? Because your strategy going forward depends on your answer. We want you to evaluate your donor mix. If in 2019 you had a certain number of donors in each category, individual, corporate, foundation, and government will include that. How many did you have in 2020? Did you lose some? Did you add some? What was different for you? We've never had this before. You've got to do your own institutional research, because then we got to figure out, okay, now, can we automatically assume we're going back to 2019? Everything's going to be the way it was? Or if you had a good 2020, was that just because of COVID and people were trying to help you an extra amount? Are they going to go back to what they did in 2019 or not? Now, I'm going to give you an example of goal setting that not everybody thinks about. So let's say this year, you had 2019, whatever that was, and we'll talk about 2020. Let's say you raised $250,000 last year, and you want to increase it by 10%. Now, that's a big jump. Most annual funds only increase 3 or 4%, but maybe we're trying to make up for lost ground compared to 2019. That would be $25,000 that you would have to get to $275,000. That would be a 10% increase. Well, what if you lost a gift last year, $25,000? Somebody died, somebody moved away, somebody said, I only did this because of COVID, I'm not going to do it again. And maybe normally you lose about 1% of your donors. I don't know, yours might be higher or lower, maybe you don't lose any. I've never seen an institution that didn't regularly have to replace donors. So here's your numbers. You're losing a $25,000 gift, and you're losing $2,500 just because of the norm. So if that's the case, you're really starting at $222,500. You're not starting at $250,000. That's not your base. And make sure your business officer understands that. Whoever is balancing your budget, your board finance chair, you all got to agree, here is our base starting point. So if you still wanted to get to $275,000, you actually need $52,500 in new money. And I'm not sure that's really possible, because that is a 21% increase. I don't know too many institutions who can afford a 21% increase in 1 year. Is it realistic? So I'm encouraging you to, if you don't already know this, to go back and figure out what this is for you. If you have a development officer, or if you have a development committee that have helped you over time, you really got to look at the people who've given to you to see, are they going to give again this year? What happened with their giving last year? And how do we move forward? Goal setting can really trip you up. You don't want to give a goal to a development committee or a development officer and say, hey, here's your goal. This is what we need to balance the budget, when it's not realistic. So if you have questions about this, we can help you with that too. So now that we've looked at what happened in the rest of the United States, what happened in SEMC, and now you're coming in with what happened with your institution, we think you should not be counting on much corporate support because it declined in 2020. We expect it to decline again. And our conversations with organizations, unless you have a great relationship and they're just going to keep giving to you every year, it's going to be very difficult to go out and get some new corporate support. Doesn't mean they don't care about you. It means they have no cash. Their companies all suffered during COVID as well. So they might give you some volunteers. They might give you a board member. They might say, I'll come back in 2 years. But the next year or two, we need to work in those other sectors that we talked about. There's probably not going to be much more government support. Now, NEA and NEH, the Community Foundation of Greater Atlanta, as an example, for those of you who are close to Atlanta, they did have an extra grant cycle this summer, but don't expect that to continue. It's just because of COVID. Now, I personally did a survey of the foundations that are give around Atlanta. I called them up and I did what I call, stewardship of them. And I said, well, how are y'all doing? And I asked them 3 questions and I got everybody. I got Russ Harden at the Woodruff Foundation, and I got everybody I wanted to talk to. I called at least 17 major foundations. I have more to call when I continue the exercise, but I purposely was trying to gather data for you and for our clients. I asked them what happened to them during COVID, because I didn't know in every case, and not all their websites are up to date. I asked them, what are they going to do when COVID's over? Are they going to go back to their original guidelines, or are they going to have new opportunities? And finally, how do they want us to communicate with them? Those of you who've been receiving foundation money during COVID, nobody was having site visits, to my knowledge. They were doing them virtually. So now that COVID is over or almost over, what happens after that? Now, we got some interesting information, and I'm not sure I listed here separately, but I was enthused, and my recommendation is that you should seek foundation support. There are organizations that are giving to annual support. You can make some new friends. You can make sure they know what happened to your organization during COVID and how they can help. So during COVID, foundation giving was up. And what I was told by these people that I surveyed was that they were going to continue giving the way they normally did, but they're adding social justice and diversity. So if you have programs that meet those criteria that you can share, there's opportunity for additional funding. And going forward, there will be a mix of some virtual visits and some on-site visits. But they are pretty much back in the office, and they're ready to receive visitors when you're ready to go see them, especially if you're bringing back a capital campaign. So here's the 3 questions I just told you about, and here's the results. They noticed the same things we did. So that's just what I just told you, the 3 questions. And then, so they're pretty much back to normal, plus equity, racial justice. Oh, and I forgot that one. Education as it relates to learning deficits. So that's because kids were at home and they weren't able to learn. They've fallen behind. So organizations that have programs to assist with that, there will be extra funding for those 3 categories. Just about across the board. Every foundation I talked to said the same thing. It was fascinating. So this is not new. I probably say this to every client every year. You still should be focusing on individual support. I told you from Giving USA, 80% of the money that's given away every year comes from individuals, and that is still true during COVID. Might be different individuals. You're going to have to find some new folks and differing in amounts, and you still have to use your good fundraising skills. individuals, foundations, and let's worry about corporate in a year or two. We've got to get back to basics. That means go visit people in person, especially your major gifts or your new prospects. And you have got to ask, and you use those 3 magic words, would you consider? Linda, would you consider a gift of $1,000 for this project? And here's why. And if you want to have a campaign, it's time to get it back on track. Everybody else is, and everybody can't do a campaign at the same time. So it's the ones that are ready. It's the ones that gets to the foundation first or ask first that's going to make them. So that is a lot of information I shared with you. Many of these basics, these are a couple of resources that we share with all our clients and friends. They are both available on Amazon. Fundraising for Museums, I wrote because I kept repeating myself when I was talking to clients and visiting in museums. And then we wrote a book on, it's called The Adventures of Philanthropy. It's about 3 little kids. And we think that fundraising is for the whole family. And we think it's never too soon to teach kids about philanthropy. If you don't have a program like that, you might want to consider adding one. And we've had a lot of fun with that. We go into City of Atlanta schools and read to groups of kids and teach them about philanthropy. So if you're looking for a new project, that could be helpful to you. Now, let's answer questions. Ask questions. I'll try to answer.
Hey, Linda, can you stop your screen share?
Yes.
That way I can.
I said that. Stop share. Here we go.
Well, thank you. I've been furiously writing notes the entire time. And I think probably there's a lot of those on the call are digesting all the information. So I have a few questions that, if there's others that pop up, just put them in the Q&A or the chat. We've
Sure.
got about 5 more minutes, but I'm interested in the flatness of the corporate support. And as you and I talked a little bit about before the program, I've noticed it as well, not so much for sponsorships, but for, some of the smaller programs that in the past, it seemed like it would be an easier ask. I'm wondering, what should the touch be with the realization that these companies need a year or 2, whatever, to recover? Should we just keep engaging them, sending information generally about programs and not with a specific ask, but what is your recommendation on that?
Well, a couple things. Just as a reminder, most companies have 2 pots of money. They have marketing money, which they use for sponsorship, and then they should have philanthropic money, which they can just make an outright gift. That can be directed by the CEO or groups of employees. So if you're offering family benefits as part of membership or when people attend, you really need to track not just who they are, but where they work. So if I was going to visit Delta, I would want to say, here's the artwork having flown in from these places, and here's how many Delta employees are members, and here's how many Delta families we've had visit the museum in the last year. That kind of information is vital. I also have a personal rule that I never delete a donor. So if you're starting with research for your organization, let's look at the big picture of, here's all the corporations who've ever given to us, or maybe the last 3 years or 5 years, whatever you're able to manage. I don't know how many that is, if it's 10 or 100. So what did they do last year? So if they made a gift, we got to call them and go see them and say, thank you. This was rare. We really appreciate that you continue to support us. If they didn't give, you got to make sure they know that you noticed. They skipped a year. Oh, I'm so sorry. How are you during COVID? What happened with you all? And how can we help you? What kind of programs can we do for you? One of my clients is going to offer art classes for a company and get a sponsorship for that. That's not something they've ever done before, but I think it's very clever. And they have to figure out, can they monetize that, and can that happen every year? I don't know, but it's a great idea. So what else can be done for those who fell off the list? So you would have to almost ask them individually, depending on their level of giving. It's different if it's $100 versus $1,000. So start at the top, the ones who gave the most, and let's see what happened with them. It's just like the exercise I did with the foundations. Ask them, talk to your person, who's your contact. What happened with you all? Here's what happened with us. When can we count on your support to come back? And they'll tell you, keep sending me stuff. We'll let our employees know. We're not going to be able to give till third quarter of 22. Well, then then tickler it to get back in touch with them. And we really need to be responsive. So if they tell you, oh, just come back when you normally do, then you know. So we can't sit here and sort of figure it out. We have to ask them.
Yes, it's very
And
proactive approach, active and
I'm guessing not everybody's going to be doing that. So the sooner you call, the better.
Okay, great. There's a question for you. How many fundraising events would you recommend a museum have per year? Thinking of donor fatigue in relation to other types of fundraising and memberships and all of that.
How many would I recommend? Can I say it depends? It depends on, how many donors you have, what your history is. When I worked at the High Museum of Art as the Chief Development Officer, we opened several exhibitions every year, and we had an event for members at different levels before we started. We had openings, we had programs throughout with the curator, and then we had closings. So we might have at least a half a dozen events just for one exhibition for 14 weeks, and then we do it again. I don't know about the donors, but there was definitely staff burnout. That was a lot. Now we had a nice large staff, at least at the time, but as that changed over time, we weren't able to keep up with that. So you almost have to ask your donors. We did a quick survey for SEMC. Could you do a quick donor poll and ask your major donors what they want? Are you ready to come back? What kind of events do you want? You ready to come to a gala, or you want to just come have lunch with the executive director and then do that? Now you have to be careful when you ask people's opinion. You need to respond to them. You can't just ignore them, because then they're going to think, well, I'm not going to bother to give my opinion. You can't do everything they want, but you could give us survey results and say, here's what we heard. We're going to do one gala and one event every time we open an exhibition. So what is that, 2 or 3? Maybe one large. I like to do something twice a year. So you can have a gala and an auction, or mix it up some other way. It doesn't have to be a gala, but one is your signature event that everybody wants to come to. Sometimes organizations only do those every other year. You can have smaller specific events based on, if somebody cares about contemporary art and you got a new piece of art, you might have an event just for them. People feel special, but you run the risk of leaving someone out. So you can invite donors and prospects and board members who care about that. And then if it works, repeat it. I worked on a campaign one time and we had chicken salad lunches once a week with the executive director. And you knew when you got invited, you were special, because not everybody got to come. And when they came, they knew they had to get out their checkbook, but everybody wanted to come.
Huh. I'm just curious, where did the checkbook, how did that play into
the first
lunch?
group that came, they all made gifts based on whatever we were talking about that day, and it changed over time. And it wasn't sort of in a campaign readiness mode. So if you invite your top donors in and give them some insider information, then follow up and get some gifts, the next group that comes, they've already talked. Your constituents know each other, they talk, they go to events together, and they're going to go, I went to, I've supported X project. And if you're going to have lunch, you're probably going to be asked for that too. It's okay for them to be prepped.
Okay, these are great ideas. So we are at time, but I just have one final question.
Yes.
It's about the 100% board giving. Some board members want to give towards an endowment. Do you recommend giving a menu of ways to give or things to support, or just this is your service to the board, you need to give at this level?
I like to work with a board commitment form. It takes planning, but it's a one-page document. for the board member to complete each year, with an individual solicitation that comes with it, whether that would be by me, the development officer, the ED, or a volunteer. And it says, I'm going to give this much to the annual fund, and I'm going to give to X project because that's our project for the year. I'm going to pay on my campaign pledge or consider a campaign pledge. I'm going to introduce the ED to 3 people. I sit on this foundation board, and I will go with you to solicit them. We'll attend X event, because it's already on that one page. When I first went to the high, I had 80 board members, and I went to visit each one individually. It took me 4 months. But when I went, I took a list of the 27 different ways there were to give to the High Museum. And I had to come up with that list because no one knew. That all the board members had told me when I got there was, y'all asked me for money way too many times. So I put it all on one page, and I said, this is what you did last year. Thank you so much. You gave to these 3 things. Now, what do you want to do for this year? And if you complete this one page one time, we won't come back for another year. And they loved it. And our giving went up 350% because no one ever explained to them that there were 27 different ways to give. And they didn't get solicited 27 times. They could pick and choose, and they learned new things. The following year, I could just send them this list, and I only went to visit in person the new board members and went through the same process. And everybody completes a form.
I love that idea of communicating back a giving history too, because, you know, there may be accountants or other people or
they forget, they don't know. Yeah.
So, okay, that's really a wonderful strategy. So we are at time, over time. Thank you everybody for staying on, and for Linda, this is terrific information. I mean, really, just it is a new, I keep calling it the next normal. I don't know that this is the new normal, because who knows how long we'll stay in this phase. We're still in sort of transition out of pandemic, but just having a better understanding of what you found from your research in terms of foundations and corporations and individuals and where people are, I think it definitely gives us all some direction in how to continue the approach. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that. I was raising money after 9/11 when it became very difficult to raise money, especially in arts. And then after 2008, when the economy fell apart. So it has been difficult this year, and I know that, and I appreciate that. But giving will come back, and depending on how your museum was doing, I wish you great success going forward, because I think things were going to get better.
Well, thank you so much. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have recorded this. And so if you want to come back and watch Linda's presentation, and we can also put the PowerPoint, you know, I can share those materials as well. So really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to future successes with fundraising. So thank you so much. Everybody have a great day.